Happy Thursday, church family. It is Pastor Henry here to tell you about what you can expect this Saturday at the 7th Collective. As usual, hope you're staying dry and safe in the fog that is descending upon the upstate as you may be out and about. Hopefully not watching this video while you were driving. In any case, if last week we were dealing with Luke chapter 1 and a little known aspect of the story of the incarnation, that means God coming to earth and becoming one of us, incarnated in human flesh. We were talking about how Immanuel also means us with us, in that the gospel reconnects us to humanity. So this week we're going to move into Luke chapter 2 to maybe a more familiar part of the Christmas story, but we're going to look at an aspect of it that we in the West have basically overlooked and or changed for the last couple centuries that might be inhibiting us from really remembering what the story communicates about Immanuel, God with us. So if last week we were talking about being connected with others, we're going to go in reverse order. And this week talk about how God connects with us and just how he does that and what that really means for us today, in looking at an aspect that probably is going to make some of us really sad that we've viewed the Christmas story some other way. But anyway, that's this Saturday. But before we can get into the teaching this Saturday, we still have two questions outstanding from the last Saturday that we want to get to. Now, some of you might be going, you're doing that in this video? Like, where's Pastor Michael? I thought you guys normally handle that. Well, we do, but just like the fog has descended outside, the health has descended with Pastor Michael. So I am letting him recover today. And as I've been running around, I'm stopping for a few minutes to try and answer the two questions that we've received since last Saturday. And so I'm going to try and answer those now. He just sent me those questions a minute ago. So I'm going to look over here at my computer and read those two, and we'll try and answer them really quickly together because we love engaging with you as you engage with us and the text of Scripture. All right, so our first question is, what if you're an Elizabeth to a Mary that doesn't seem to want to make the necessary changes that she continually talks to you about? I know patience is a virtue. However, should truth be spoken in love, even if it hurts my Mary? Now, before you all think that's a super personal question, and we can already guess a female has asked this, just a quick reminder of what we meant by Elizabeth and Mary this last week. We were using them figuratively in the story to remind us that Elizabeth, by being an Elizabeth, is someone who is being a witness to God's work in someone's life, who's serving as a mentor, and someone who's confirming God's work in your life, right? So Mary, the opposite of that would be who is the one receiving that mentoring, that confirmation, that ministry, because we saw those two ladies in Luke chapter 1 were really supporting one another. Okay, so if I understand this question correctly, someone is trying to mentor, I would assume, speak into the figurative Mary of their life, and that person doesn't seem to be wanting to change or accept that mentoring or any number of things like that. And I appreciate that this writer is saying, hey, I'm trying to be patient, but when should I speak the truth in love or whatnot? Well, a couple thoughts to this right off the bat. First of all, this is just difficult in any relationship. We are often, if we're honest, more scared about someone's opinion of us than what is actually best for the other person. Now, that doesn't mean it's a virtue like some Christians think. Let me go be mean and really harsh to somebody when I tell them something, and if they get mad, that's on them and the Lord, and it doesn't matter if I was a jerk about it. But if you've been patient, if you've been listening, if you've been trying other ways, and somebody just doesn't seem to be getting subtle hints or something else like that, it is a very loving thing biblically to, if you won't share it with them, no one else probably is. Or if your deep relationship with someone's not going to allow them to hear it, definitely someone right off the street they're not going to hear. But there may come a point where you do have to share something that's uncomfortable for someone to hear. You're going to want to prayerfully think, how can I do this? Can I do this in a way that they can hear? Can I try and mitigate their resistance to what I'm saying? But it is loving to be finally direct with people. Kind, but direct. Some of that kind of influences that Matthew 18 principles we've talked about in past videos. You might want to check that out, right? Because you're also going to want to ask yourself, what is your motive for sharing with them? Well, that kind of goes to my second point I want to make about this question, right? I appreciate someone recognizes that they may be an Elizabeth to a Mary. But after a while, like we saw in Luke chapter 1, these are not relationships that stay permanent. Mary didn't stay with Elizabeth through her entire pregnancy. She wasn't with her the entirety of her life. It was a season of life. So there's two questions I would ask to this really quickly. First of all, if they're not willing to listen to you, if you've been trying and it's not going, you have to ask yourself two things. First of all, why, as best you can guess. And if you can't get, try and figure out from them. But two, you might have to ask yourself, is my season of being an Elizabeth with this person coming to an end? Right? You don't want to just keep beating down a door that somebody's not wanting. Maybe somebody has allowed you into their life with the door open for that point to be a mentor like that, and now you're getting resistance to that. And so that's something you might just have to really ask yourself, is my season of Elizabething, coming to an end? Right? I mean, just have an honest conversation with this person, try and share with them. But if they're still resistant, go, hey, I thought you were asking me. I hope there was some sort of understanding that you were serving as an Elizabeth in their life. But I don't feel like we're getting anywhere. Is this something that's still valuable to you? Would you like to move on? Should I stop just, messing with you like that? Or do you still want to give me permission in life to do that? And if that's the case, there's some things I'm seeing I would really like to share with you, right? An honest reassessment of the relationship, both individually and collectively, is probably in order, right? Make sure that this is an Elizabeth-Mary relationship that you have agreed is an Elizabeth-Mary relationship. And if you have, and they're not kind of responding in that way, it's probably a good time for a health checkup and say, is this still a relationship we want to move this way anymore? Or would you like to move on? I mean, they have a right to decide no, right? So it's kind of a balance of things. Make sure your relationship is, the understanding of your relationship is connected between both parties. In other words, am I really an Elizabeth? Am I really a Mary? Do we both understand that's the relationships we're having with one another? If so, and there's resistance, I would try and ask why. That might be a great way to bring it up. Hey, I'm noticing some resistance here to some mentoring I'm trying to do. Are you still interested in this kind of relationship? Would you like to move on? Is this a new season and we need to find new Marys and Elizabeths, that kind of thing? And if they're still open to it, then maybe have that harsh conversation, kindly but harsh. And then if they're still resistant, then you might have to ask yourself, independent of what they say, am I really being effective as an Elizabeth in this case? Or do I need to know when to step out, right? Elizabeth in our story didn't tell Mary to leave before her pregnancy. Mary knew it was time to leave, right? This is that balance. We have to know when we give grace, but also when we can receive it. There's seasons. So I don't know if that kind of answers that question. Again, I'm just seeing it now in a way that is helpful, but I would say that again. So make sure there is an understanding between the two people that you are in an Elizabeth-Mary situation and who is who. If there's confusion about that, get that clarity. If there was an agreement to that, maybe approach it by saying, hey, can I get some clarity because I've been noticing some resistance to stuff? And then double check that you're being honest and not worried about what they think, that you honor the mentoring relationship more than you value their opinion of you, and be kind about it, but do confront them even if you're worried about the risk to you, and et cetera. So hopefully all of that jumble of words made some sense. Okay, we got one more question. Mary is described as receiving God's favor, yet that favor brought significant hardship, risk, and suffering. How should we understand God's favor when it seems to come with so much difficulty? And how do we respond when the cost of receiving it makes us hesitant or fearful? Oh, okay. That's a very interesting question there. So receiving God's favor, it means his grace, right? His affection, all that, right? Obviously, God was connecting with Mary in that part of the passage, like he tries to connect with all humanity. It's a reflection of humanity, God with us, and what we'll talk about again this week. But the question is specifically, how do I understand God liking me or being with favor with me or trying to connect with me if the response to that seems to be suffering, risk, difficulty? And obviously as that comes, then what do I do when it makes me resistant to connecting with him? That's actually a pretty profound insight of a question. So thank you for whoever sent that in. I would say this. First of all, just a practical. You have to ask yourself if the reason God's favor comes with risk and suffering and hardship and difficulty and all of this is because that is how God's favor is, or that's how the world responds to his favor. In other words, is the difficulty and risk because God has built in difficulty and risk to following him? I mean, there is obviously trade-offs in any decision that anyone makes to follow God, to just trust in themselves, to do whatever else. But is it God's favor that is producing the difficulty and risk and all in Mary's life? Or is it in following God, the world is throwing up difficulty and risk because they are not making that same decision, and now she's kind of like a fish swimming upstream. She's going against the flow. Right, a lot of the difficulty and the risk she faced was from her cultural environment, from the people around her, from society who was not in tune with God and his plan, who was not listening to God in the same ways. And so she's going to suffer, right? A lot of the drama around how could this unwed mother be pregnant, all that kind of stuff. I don't want to minimize that, but I want to stress that's not God's plan to make her have to go through all of that. Right? That's society in opposition to God causing her to go through all of that. So the first thing I would just say might be helpful in this case is to ask yourself, where do I think the difficulty is coming from? Because that kind of goes to that second point, right? What do I do when I'm hesitant and fearful? Well, a lot of times the Bible would tell us, right? This is James chapter 1 reminds me of this, right? Be not deceived, brethren. They were deceived about something. And he says, every good and perfect gift comes from above. In other words, their deception was every good and perfect gift didn't come from above because they were dealing with temptation. That's the passage in James. But the same principle comes to my mind here about that. And what I mean by that is often we become hesitant and scared to follow God if we think there's going to be difficulty in things with it because we believe God oftentimes is the one that's going to impose that on us. Oh man, God's asking me to do this because he knows it's going to cause me to suffer and have to deal with this and lose my job and blah, blah, blah. But the question is, Scripture doesn't bear that out. Is it God causing us to do all of that? Or is that just something that's naturally going to happen because the yin and the yang principle, right? If I'm not serving the world, if I'm not being selfish, if I'm trying to be selfless and serve God's way, his kingdom's in opposition to this one, right? They serve on different functions. That naturally creates conflict. That's Genesis 3. The seed of the woman will have enmity, separation, a resistance, a kind of a disagreement between the seed of the serpent. Right? There's this two different ways of living. So if you try and follow God, you're going to get resistance from the world. Now, that's not to say that God doesn't realize there's going to be that resistance, and that sometimes, by the way, the resistance isn't just from the world, it's also from us, right? We create a lot of our own difficulties in trying to be obedient. We create a lot of these angst. Some of the times we don't like it because that risk and difficulties is going to challenge my laziness or my coping mechanisms or my comfort. And I don't want to do that. So I didn't kind of blame it like, no, and then I resist. So again, figure out where is this really coming from? I'm going to give you a big hint. Biblically, it's not coming from God. It's either coming from the world around us. That's what Mary suffered. Or in some cases, it's coming from us directly. Right? We're doing it to ourselves. And so this would be a good chance. The writer asked, well, how do I respond? First step is just be honest about it. The first step to recovery is admitting you have an issue. It's not like God doesn't know, but talk to him about it. Say, God, I know that maybe you're asking me to do this. I see your favor is in my life, and that might mean a few things I would have to respond differently, but I'm scared to do that because I'm worried it's going to ruin what I like or ruin what I want to do, or it's going to cause me to have to make more effort when I already feel burned out in life and barely keeping my nose above the water. Like whatever that is, ask God, first of all, why, if you're not sure where the resistance is, ask him, hey, can you help show me, Spirit, why I feel this way, where these fears and other things are actually coming from? And then once you know, give it to him. Say, God, I don't feel good about this. I don't want to do this. I get that the word says it's not from you, but I deep down don't really believe that. And I'm scared to trust because I think you're doing it to me. Give it to him and then say, hey, make me willing to be willing. Sometimes that's the most powerful prayer you can do. Make me willing to be willing to respond favorably to your favor. Right? To be willing to go forward with this, to help assuage my fears, help give me courage. And again, remember, you don't have to do God's favor alone. Mary was not asked to do this by herself. She helped get over her fears. This kind of goes back to our first question, because God connected her to Elizabeth. He connected her to community. She had someone else to help her get through, yes, the inevitable risk and punishment and pain and all sorts of other stuff the world and life was throwing at her. So, give that to God. But then maybe always go discuss with some Elizabeths in your life. Go discuss with the faith community in safe and appropriate ways. Hey, help me get through these fears. Help me get through these concerns. Just help me grow in this area. I think that would be a great way to deal with our confusions and struggles and holdups on God's favor. So, okay, great questions. Hopefully a lot of that made sense. All right, my hand is about to fall asleep trying to hold the phone for this long, but thank you for engaging with us. And sorry it's on the phone today. We don't have all the cool tech set up again with Pastor Michael's house. Hopefully that will be restored, when he gets restored to health. Praying for that. Praying all of you will have a great rest of the week. We hope to see you Saturday when we will be in Luke 2. And until next time, keep engaging with the text, keep going to God, and know that God loves you And as God helps teach us, so does the community to you.